Hello, very beautiful community. Bungee jump with me to find out if Shoigu is doing a coup against Putin. Now, this is all over the place. It's all over the media. So I'm going to react to it. And I'm actually going to read together with you in full the whole story, which is that a Western intelligence agency has done a report on what's going on in the Kremlin. And it's anonymous, but it has been shared with important stories, CNN and FT. So this is not something we're randomly getting off Telegram. This is a real intelligence report by a Western state, and important media institutions have got a hold of it. So you can see the FT have done a story, Vladimir Putin hunkers down for fear of assassination. We've got the CNN headline, unsettled Kremlin tightens security around Putin amid assassination and coup fears, Intel Report says. And the fullest coverage of this is in important stories, and they say Vladimir Putin fears an assassination attempt and a coup by Shoigu, as we'll discover, and tensions among security services are rising, an EU intelligence agency says. So I'll literally read this through with you. You're going to imagine that coming into it, I'm not going to be skeptical about the fact that Putin's progressively paranoid. I'm not going to be skeptical about the fact that Putin's paranoid enough to start clamping down even further on his security requirements. I am going to be probably skeptical that Shoigu is trying to do a coup. But we're going to find out what's there, and we'll literally go through it word by word together. So may the force be with us, and let's see where we land, beautiful community. All right. Important Stories has obtained the report by an intelligence service of an EU country. Now, I don't know if there are some people who know which EU country it is. I don't. By an intelligence service of an EU country on the real situation in the Kremlin and the condition of Vladimir Putin. The document was provided to us by a source close to the agency that compiled the report. The editorial team is publishing the text of this report because it is significant, of significant public interest. It contains some information that's been independently verified, and the source who provided the document holds an official position in the government of a European country and risks their reputation and career if the document is a deliberate disinformation campaign. How did they risk their career? If this is completely anonymous? I'm not sure about that, to be honest. I don't think they're necessarily risking their career because this is completely anonymous. Here is the text of the document. Okay, we're going to read the whole document together. Let's rock and roll. Let's see what they can prove. The Kremlin is on high alert. Well, the Kremlin is on higher alert. We know that. There is no doubt about it. Since the beginning of March 2026, the Kremlin and Vladimir Putin have been concerned about a leak of sensitive information and at the same time about the risk of a plot or a coup attempt against the Russian president. Okay, that's a claim. Let's see where they go with it. In particular, he fears the use of drones for a possible assassination attempt by members of the political elite. So, because I haven't read this in detail, but reading it together with you, but I know the rough story, Shoigu is supposed to be behind it. So the story here is that Shoigu is trying to take Putin out with a drone. Now, Russia is so crazy, that political regime is so crazy, that you genuinely cannot rule that out happening in 5 years. However, I mean, I am very skeptical that there could possibly be any evidence for that happening now. But it's a pretty good story. Let's see. Strengthening security measures around the Russian president. In response, the Federal Protection Service, FSO, whose primary mission is to ensure the physical protection of the highest officials of the Russian state, has significantly tightened security measures around Vladimir Putin. Well, they're going to list some things here. I don't have any problem with that claim, potentially. That seems like something Putin would be plausibly doing. So let's see what they say. Visitors to the presidential administration undergo 2 levels of screening, including a full body search by FSO officers. That's meaningless unless it's contrasted with the checks that they were there before, and 2 levels of screening doesn't sound implausible for me, even relative to pre-full-scale Ukraine invasion. So that, as it stands, is a nothing burger for me. Okay. The FSO has significantly reduced the list of locations regularly visited by the president. That seems very plausible indeed. Neither he nor his family visit the usual residences in Moscow region and Valdai anymore. I don't know about that. I think that people who are investigatively, journalistically expert can give you that answer. I don't know about that, but certainly the claim that there's a reduction in the list of locations Putin visits is plausible, and even if it's a recent claim since March, that seems like a plausible claim to me. Since the beginning of the war in Ukraine, Putin has often taken refuge in renovated bunkers, particularly in the Krasnodar region, where he may work for weeks, while Russian media continue public communication using pre-recorded footage. I mean, that's not a very specific claim. It's something we could ourselves come up with. But I mean, sure, that's plausible. No visits to military infrastructure have been organized this year, in contrast to frequent visits in 2025. Okay, we're going to buy that. Communication networks in certain districts of Moscow periodically shut down. That's true. It's indeed even an understatement. They've had an absolute mess, and they're going to have an even bigger mess because Putin is obsessed with his 9th of May parade. And he's got outmaneuvered by Zelensky because he has asked for a very limited ceasefire, and Zelensky has said yes, and let's start it earlier. So Zelensky returned the ball into Putin's court. But certainly they're going to have unprecedented internet shutdowns over the next few days, and they're going to have an absolutely humiliating 9th of May parade, because Putin has made it such a big pillar of his propaganda machine and even his legitimation ritual that having a pathetic and emaciated event without military technology where Putin is whisked in and whisked out, it looks weak, and it actually does a little bit of corrosive damage to the perception of Putin as the only institution with political legitimacy in town. FSO officers conduct large-scale checks using canine units and are also deployed along the Moscow River, ready to respond to possible drone attacks. I mean, that just like is a version of normal. Sure. I mean, sure, they're doing that. But that's a nothing burger thing to say, I'm afraid. FSO now controls and approves any information or media publication involving the president, relying on a secret presidential decree, apparently referring to announcements of Putin's trips and participation in various events. All right, I don't have a comment about that. Personnel working near Putin are now prohibited from using their mobiles. They must use devices without internet access. So let's assume that could be true. These employees are also banned from using public transport, and they move exclusively using FSO transport. Surveillance systems have been installed in the homes of cooks, photographers, and bodyguards. I mean, plausible, so sure. Sergei Shoigu, considered a potential destabilizing actor. All right, let's rock and roll, beautiful community. Let's see what Mr. Shoigu can be up to. Mr. Shoigu, former Minister of Defense and Secretary of the Security Council of the Russian Federation since his demotion in 2024, who retained significant influence within the military command. Mostly he doesn't. Is associated with the risk of a coup attempt. By whom? And does that mean he's actually planning one, or he is associated with one by somebody? And who is that paranoid person? The rest of his former first deputy, Ruslan Tsalikov, in March 2026, and Tsalikov is under house arrest, he's not in jail, is seen as a violation of informal guarantees of safety for elites. No, it's just no. I mean, they've had a Minister of the Economy arrested while acting in his role 10 years ago, Mr. Ulukayev. I don't buy that claim. Weakening Shoigu's position and increasing the likelihood that he himself may face criminal prosecution. Is that it? Rising tensions in security structures. Well, let's see if they have some more to say. If this is it, this is really, really poor. Now, there is a Telegram channel. Let me throw this on the screen. Let me find it. So, yeah, it's VCK OGPU, and they did it's a Milblog Telegram channel, they did a Shoigu coup story a while ago. Could it be that a Western intelligence report just ripped something random of Russian Telegram? It's possible. It's obviously embarrassing if that's the case, but it's possible. I suppose we should say at the end what this is, what the intelligence report is trying to achieve. But I think we need to read on for that. If this is all we've got on Shoigu, then basically Shoigu does not have either the credibility or the resources or the security facilitation to be plausibly thought of as realistically organizing a coup. Does that mean Shoigu could never organize a coup? No, things change. These are very labile, very volatile regimes. But at the moment, I can't imagine any seriously deep country expert finding this remotely plausible. I mean, the way it can happen is if somebody else organizes a coup a few years from now, perhaps, and puts Shoigu in to run the country. But you see, that's different to your cat at home organizing a coup against you. Your cat can't organize a coup against you in your house. And that's roughly Shoigu's predicament today. Somebody could organize a coup in your house and put the cat in charge. The cat can't put itself in charge. And so you've got to understand both that Shoigu is very weak when it comes to the military. His cronies have been targeted by the regime, and folks who have gone on in the Ministry of Defense, including Gerasimov, have distanced themselves from Shoigu. So Shoigu doesn't have the cred and the resources to do it. Moreover, that's true, but it's also true that Shoigu is still perceived by Putin as an important actor in the regime toward whom he feels loyalty and who is worth protecting. I mean, Shoigu and his daughter are running rare earth projects for Putin. So Putin is placing Shoigu away from the MOD and the military, but is giving Shoigu considerable responsibility for, various sort of future-facing strategic purposes. So there is very little room to visualize how this stuff gets off the ground. But if you go 5 years into the future, think about how Stalin was replaced. And think about how, via a couple of intermediate figures, Brezhnev was replaced. What they focused on was getting in a neutral, relatively weak figure who it looked like could be controlled. Right? So potentially a figure like Shoigu could meet that condition as a candidate in a transitional regime. But the conditions for that are not there. It would require a crack in the regime and a degree of political mobilization in society. And it would also, that's missing, but what's also missing is a plausible account of Shoigu's motivation, any remotely plausible account of his capacity to do something like this. And then further, any plausible account of Shoigu being desperate or lost or being on the edge. He remains a figure who has been shifted from a particular role and demoted. And his cronies have got targeted, but he remains protected and trusted by the regime. So give me some juice, otherwise this is complete nonsense. And there is no juice. Unless there is juice. Could there be juice later? Rising tensions among security structures. The issue of the physical security of senior Russian armed forces officers has led to increased tensions among representatives of the security agencies. Okay, blah, 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 blah. They had a meeting. Okay, let's see what happened at the meeting. During the meeting, representatives of the security agencies, the so-called Siloviki, blamed one another for shortcomings in the security system revealed by Ukrainian attacks. Okay. Emphasizing that these attacks caused fear and disorganization within the ranks of the Russian armed forces, Mr. Gerasimov sharply criticized his colleagues from the intelligence services for failing to anticipate them. The chief of the general staff, Mr. Gerasimov, also complained about a lack of personnel for the physical protection of officers in the rear parts of the country and drew the president's attention to the issue. They might be incompetent and disorganized. I doubt they've got a lack of personnel. So there is plenty of agencies to fulfill this task that Gerasimov is allegedly talking about. So this rings a little bit false for me. The director of the Federal Security Service, Mr. Bortnikov, in turn defended himself by stressing the impossibility of systematically preventing such attacks. No, he didn't. The director of the Federal Security Service, Mr. Bortnikov, in turn defended himself by stressing the impossibility of systematically preventing such attacks. That is completely unsayable for Bortnikov in front of Putin. And it makes no sense for him to say that. It's completely a culturally impossible statement. He could say that you can't stop all of it, but we are doing our best to stop all of it. but that you can't systematically prevent such attacks it just reads like an external statement. So it reads like it's got written by some 24-year-old kid somewhere who doesn't know much about Russia, and can't get themselves deeply into how actual power dynamics work in practice. No way Bortnikov says that. He criticized the Ministry of Defense for lacking a specialized unit responsible for the protection of top officials, similar to those in other security agencies. The head of the National Guard, Mr. Zolotov, in turn noted that the resources at his disposal cannot be allocated to protect officers of the Ministry of Defense. He also addressed operational security recommendations, blah, blah, blah. At the end of the meeting, Putin said, "Let's be calm," and instructed participants to submit their proposals for resolving the issue within a week. Okay. So, expansion of security measures for 10 senior Russian generals. After the meeting, Vladimir Putin met with Federal Protective Service Director Dmitry Kochnev, whose primary task is to ensure the physical security of top state officials. It was decided to amend the internal regulations of the FSO by expanding the list of individuals under its enhanced protection. Plausible to me. Previously, such protection applied only to Gerasimov. Now it's been extended to 10 senior generals, including 3 deputy chiefs of the general staff. Putin's decision, made at the request of the general staff, demonstrates the political weight of Valery Gerasimov, who succeeded in this arbitration while other security agencies have so far failed to expand the FSO's mandate in their interests. So let's have a look. List of the generals placed under the FSO protection. Do we need this? We don't need this. No, we don't need this. Skip it. What is independently confirmed? Okay, so this is now the end. We've just read the whole report, presumably. Yeah, we have. So this is what important stories they're adding. Some of the information in this report is confirmed by independent sources. For example, that the large-scale internet shutdowns in Moscow are carried out by the FSO rather than the FSB, as reported by some media outlets, had been told to important stories a month earlier by a former FSB officer, who may have been presumably telling the truth or deliberately lying. However, we did not publish this at the time because we could not find a second source to confirm it. Now the same claim appears in the European intelligence report. Several sources of important stories also confirm the increased fear of Putin over a plot or a coup attempt. Vague, 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 vague. This is evidenced not only by heightened security measures around the Kremlin and other locations visited by the Russian president, but also by some indirect signs. For example, a current FSB officer told important stories that it has become much more difficult for his unit to obtain authorization for wiretapping in non-political criminal cases because all equipment has been redirected to monitor the government and other state bodies. The extreme level of Putin's fear of an assassination attempt or conspiracy is also indirectly indicated by the fact that this year not a single deputy of the State Duma received an invitation to the Victory Day parade in Red Square. Sure, I mean, that's understandable. Why this report is one of the most important recent stories about Russia is something you can read about in a column by Important Stories founder Roman Anin. So let's see what he says. It appears that we are witnessing the transition of the Russian regime into a fundamentally different state. The deadlock in the war in Ukraine, painful Ukrainian drone strikes on oil infrastructure, economic and social problems, all of these factors combined, as Important Stories has previously written, were bound sooner or later to lead to a struggle among Russia's Siloviki clans for the throne of a weakened dictator. So, I have been talking about transit politics. I'm not the only one. I have been talking about transit politics in the Putin regime from before the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. That's true. But it's not true that people are circling to take the throne of a weakening dictator. But transit politics is absolutely conditioning both what Putin does and how people around him act. Transit politics means we're acting with a consciousness that we are little by little moving toward some moment of crisis when there's going to be a change. That could be for biological reasons, it could be for political reasons. You can't understand Kremlin dynamics unless you understand that. But that is not the same as people circling to acquire the throne of a weakening dictator. Putin, who himself built this system of power, understands well what awaits him. Hence the growing paranoia, the unprecedented isolation from the public and from his inner circle, and the attempt to create a new oprichnina in the form of the Federal Protective Service endowed with unlimited coercive powers. This means that in the short historical perspective, Russia's got two paths. The Iranian path. Putin will succeed in consolidating loyal security services around himself, which will form a Russian analog of the IRGC. All right, let's leave it at that. And the other scenario is the time of troubles. Historians don't like analogies, but history does not stop reproducing them. So we roughly get that. We're going to have destructive internal crisis and maybe war and maybe some degree of disintegration, or we're going to have a consolidation of power. I suppose the third scenario, these are plausible scenarios, but the third scenario is the Gorbachev-Khrushchev scenario, whereby there is a sustenance of something like this regime in a version light. Okay, so what do we think of this? Well, I think we need to understand what the hell this is, who it's written for, and why it's written. But before we speculate about that, let me add one more important thing that is also sort of easily missed here when you think about what it would mean for Shoigu to do a coup on Putin, to try one. Now, imagine that J.D. Vance turns on Trump. J.D. Vance could actually advantage his future political career that way if he did that, but J.D. Vance is going to face certain consequences. Now, these consequences are going to be political. Nobody is going to disappear J.D. Vance and his family. You've got to understand this basic contrast with Shoigu and Putin. You saw it with what happened to Prigozhin, who tried a kind of mutiny, not a coup. A mutiny that perhaps had a risk of a certain kind of becoming a coup. If you try this and you fail, you lose your life. Understand that. Secondly, understand the extreme process of negative selection at the top of the Putin regime. These are people who are there because of two key qualities. Loyalty, number one, and number two, complete moral emptiness. A complete incapacity to assert an ethical boundary. Right? These are people who are not going to hit a crisis of feeling they are being irresponsible at any point. Even if Putin chooses to build concentration camps for millions of Russians. Loyalty, number one, and moral vacuity, moral degeneration are the two key criteria for this negative selection. Competence is the next criteria. So these are very, 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 very passive people. That doesn't mean they won't act, but that's another important historical truth. People act out coups not because they've put together one, but because they're put into a historical position where it's the logical thing for them to do. So this question you often ask, when will people turn on Putin? When circumstances obtain that make it very rational for these people to turn on Putin. So it's history first, biography second. It's not going to happen when some people decide something sitting at that kitchen table. It's going to happen when circumstances change. And the roles are largely going to play the people rather than people playing the roles. Tendentiously, this is true. There are exceptions. Because we shouldn't underestimate the power of the individual in history. But you've got to hold all of these tensions. You don't have magical views about the power of the individual. So these are very, 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 very passive people without any sense of ethical responsibility, for whom acting would immediately instigate an overwhelming likelihood of losing their life. They're not going to act. They're not going to act until circumstances virtually force them into acting. And over and above that, this is a nothing burger as far as the Shoigu part is concerned. The other parts have a degree of plausibility about them. The Shoigu part, because there is just no evidence for it. And as I've articulated, understanding Shoigu's relationship with the regime, Shoigu's activities, but also Shoigu's weak position vis-a-vis the military and the MOD, all of that, and an understanding of Putin's sentiments about Shoigu, that are long-standing sentiments of loyalty, combined with a complete lack of evidence of any kind about this, put this at 99.9% BS. So why is the BS there, the Shoigu part in particular? Is this politicized intelligence, just like lazy trash given to politicians because that's what they want to hear? And don't underestimate the desperation of the world giving something to European politicians when it comes to the Putin issue or the Trump issue, right? But as I discussed with Anthony Scaramucci a couple of days ago, folks are in a very, very passive position, hoping that bad things that are happening will just reset themselves and go away. That's our attitude to Putin. We don't have a policy that accelerates the disappearance of the Putin regime as a threat to us. So there is a tendency to lapse into magical thinking and dramatically exaggerate the degree to which history is going to deliver you something nice next Tuesday. Same with Trump. He's an aberration. We can wait it out. Maybe he'll change a bit. Fingers crossed. Blah, 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 blah. So has an intelligence report fed into that atmosphere and produced politicized garbage? Very plausible. On the other hand, could this be a bit of manipulation? Could this be a deliberately deceptive intervention designed to do what? Designed to accelerate the perception that the Putin regime is vulnerable in the West, and designed to accelerate the perception within the Putin regime that it is vulnerable from within itself? That latter part is not plausible. Putin is not going to get more anxious about anything as a result of this report. He's not going to start just because there's something unevidenced given there. He's not going to start thinking that Shoigu is trying to take him out with a drone. Final remark, though, don't underestimate the strangeness of that regime and the strangeness of history, right? Shoigu could take Putin out with a drone, but very different conditions need to obtain for that to be the case. They're simply not there. There is no evidence for it here. So I'm calling BS on the Shoigu part. I am uncertain about the purpose of this intervention. Tell me what you think in the comments. Is this a politicized bit of intelligence? Is it a piece of deliberate manipulation, or do you actually think that Shoigu's getting his act into gear? But as I say, it's important to understand that while current conditions don't obtain for anything like the Shoigu remark there, this could change, but it requires circumstances changing, not Shoigu changing. There's nothing Shoigu can think and wake up tomorrow that'll make him capable of a coup against Putin. That'll only be possible when there is a crack in the regime, when there is a crisis of politicization in the population, and when political voices are beginning to articulate themselves that offer both a critique of the regime and also some positive alternate vision. Don't think I'm necessarily saying these are going to be pro-democratic critiques. They might not be. But these are the kind of ingredients that need to be in place. I'm rambling at the end, but I'll just ramble one last bit of rambling. What is visible is that the sacredness of Putin as a political institution, that is corroding little by little. That's a slow, toxic process that Putin can't do anything about. And he'll need to react to it by accelerating repression in the medium term. Thank you for this breakdown, for sharing this breakdown with me. Less juicy than we thought, or rather sort of vacuously juicy. But that's live, beautiful community. Talk very soon.